Cardinal, last night's programme accused you of deliberately, willfully refusing to take responsibility for your action, for your inaction, which left children exposed to abuse. Very, very strong statement. How do you respond to that?
Well, first of all, I want to say that I was very upset by the programme of last night. It misrepresented me on a number of issues. First of all, it misrepresented my role in the inquiry. It represented me as being the investigator. I was part of a team who investigated the allegation of abuse by Brendan Smyth. And my role was that of note taker. And we have the notes to prove that. I was also very upset by the fact the omission of part of Monsignor Chicluna's statement, which was provided to the programme makers. But the fact that the accusation that I deliberately refused to take responsibility, I hold that I acted to protect children throughout this. My bishop asked me to be part of this investigation to get the evidence against Brendan Smyth of abuse. I went along and I recorded the evidence. I had it verified by another witness and then presented it to Bishop McKiernan, who took it to Abbot Smith of Kilnacrot for action, to have Brendan Smyth stopped in his tracks, because he was the only person who had the power and the responsibility to do so. And I was later on, many years later on, when I discovered that Brendan Smyth had in fact abused people after that, children after that, I was outraged, I was appalled, I felt betrayed. But at all times I was doing my utmost to make sure that the evidence was produced and brought to those who could stop him.
Let's just look at the role you had in that inquiry. In the case of Brendan Boland, you were the note taker.
Yes.
We saw last night documentary evidence of your work.
That's right.
The detail,
Yes.
at times excruciating detail, that was gathered in your presence.
Yes, in my presence.
The modalities of how a paedophile operates.
Yes.
The scale of it.
Yes.
Not just one boy, but the new information that emerged for us, the general public, last night was the suggestion of other children, boys and young girls, being abused by this man. So you were the note taker who assiduously gathered that information.
Absolutely.
But when we look back on child abuse now, we say we look back on things with hindsight. If we knew then what we know now, things would be different. But because you so assiduously did your job as a note taker, you knew chapter and verse of the awfulness that was going on. Isn't that fair?
I knew chapter and verse of what was going on. I didn't have the awareness I now have of the impact that that behaviour was having on those children. But I did assiduously gather the notes and take them promptly to my bishop, confirmed by the evidence of one other witness, and brought these to the attention of Bishop McKiernan on the understanding that he was going to take them, which he did, to the Norbertines in Kilnacrot for action, because the only way that this abuse could be stopped was to restrict the movement of Brendan Smyth. That was the only sure way.
But when you say, I didn't know the impact of abuse, you weren't some highfalutin theologian knocking around the Vatican. You were a country priest from rural Ireland. You were a teacher of adolescent boys in St. Patrick's College in Cavan.
Yes.
So regardless of how the state was behaving or the church was behaving, as a human being, you were hearing chapter and verse in, some would say, almost voyeuristic style detail that was, I suppose, characteristic of that investigation. So you had that evidence. And did the human being in you, even at that stage, not say, regardless of the structures here, I mix with adolescent boys, I teach them. I'm a human being, I'm a member of humanity, and I cannot let this go on. And it's not enough to refer it inside the internal structures of the church.
I was teaching boys of that age at that time, every day, every week, and I believed Brendan Boland, and I took on board what he said, and I did what I thought was most effective in stopping this terrible abuse by referring it to the man who had the power to curb the movements of Brendan Smyth, namely the abbot of Kilnacrot. I trusted that that would take place. Okay, I didn't. Maybe perhaps I was in a culture of deference and maybe unhelpful silence. I didn't raise the matter again, but that was out of respect for the confidentiality, the seriousness with which I took that. But I honestly believed that it would be dealt with. And even today, it's the job of somebody designated within the order or within the diocese to make sure that the action is taken forward by whether it's reporting to the police or informing the parents. Even today, it would not be my role to do that.
But in the years afterwards, okay, 4 or 5 years later, you were gone to Rome. Did it not come back to you at night, the memory of what this boy had said, the notion that this priest was picking up altar boys and their sisters and bringing them off to boarding houses and physically, emotionally destroying them, abusing them? Did it not come back to you, I wonder what happened, I should check? Were you able to sleep at night with the memories of that evidence that was presented to you and that you took down so assiduously and presented to your bishop? Were you able to live with that, or were you able to compartmentalise it? Or how did, as a human being, how did you manage to deal with that?
Well, it's 37 years ago now. I know it made an impact on me, but as I say, I did act, and I acted as I thought most effectively to put an end to the abuse by referring the matter through my bishop to the man who had the power to stop the abuse being perpetrated by Smyth.
But quite apart from your role as priest or now cardinal, did the human being in you, did the uncle in you, did the cousin in you not say, was there not an instinct in you that you wanted to break every bone in Brendan Smyth's body? Were you able to let him go into the care of the abbot of Kilnacrot, where obviously he went on abusing, as we heard last night, he went on abusing children for years and years and years afterwards. Children whose names you had in that documentation.
Well, when I heard that, I was outraged, as I said already. I felt a great sense of betrayal, that the trust that I had placed that something would happen didn't in fact happen. That's my recollection of it at the moment. As I say, I have a greater awareness now of the impact of sexual abuse on children through the experience of these years. And that's what makes me determined to create in the church a safe place for all children.
I remember your reaction at one stage when this controversy first surfaced. You said that Fr Brendan Smyth had been stopped hearing confession, as if that was a very significant achievement. But to people who struggle in their day-to-day lives to survive, that might seem from another universe, from another planet, that as long as the main thing was to stop him hearing confession, which actually probably in practice gave him more free time to continue preying on children and destroying their lives.
What the Bishop of Kilmore did was to withdraw the faculties of the Diocese of Kilmore from Brendan Smyth, which means that he wasn't entitled then to minister in other dioceses. But that was all that was all the Bishop of Kilmore could do, because Brendan Smyth belonged to an order which was exempt from diocesan control in other matters. So that okay, I know that it appears to people outside as not of great significance, but it was what the Bishop of Kilmore could do and did do. But he also recommended that Brendan Smyth be sent for psychiatric assessment. In other words, he wanted to suggest to the superiors there that there was a problem which should be dealt with, and that was the belief that it would be dealt with, and dealt with effectively, because there was the source of the problem when he was allowed to roam the countryside and perpetrate this terrible abuse.
What does it say to you now when you look back at how your superiors, your line manager and others behaved towards those children? And remember, you knew in very, very vivid detail how their lives had been damaged. What does it say to you about their behaviour?
It tells me that child sexual abuse is an awful crime which must be eradicated. We must put in place measures and protocols and procedures which weren't in place there, either on the part of the church or the state, to guide us. We were in uncharted territory at that time, and that is why something new had to be put in place. And I'm very pleased that these measures have been put in place, but they must be monitored and implemented. And also it tells me that victims, survivors have suffered a great deal, and they must be cared for and looked after.
You were the note taker with Brendan Boland. You then took it upon yourself to interview another boy. You asked the questions, you wrote down the answers. That went with your file, with your report to the bishop. Did you tell his parents what you were doing?
No. I interviewed that other boy simply to have corroboration of what Brendan Boland had said. And it was that was the sole purpose. And I didn't ask all the questions that were asked in the previous interview. And this boy had not complained, he had not made any representations. I did not want to disturb him. Again, maybe it was too deferential to confidentiality. And but once I got his confirmation of what Brendan Boland had said, well then I said, this is firm, irrefutable evidence of the abuse that's been perpetrated. Something must be done. And that something could be done only by the abbot of Kilnacrot, who was the sole person who had the power and the authority and the responsibility to do so. And once I had made that work, I felt my function had ceased.
But this was Seán Brady, teacher.
Yes.
In a diocesan college.
Yes.
Adolescent boys.
Yes.
You'd have lots of contact with parents.
Every day.
You were a person of the
Every
world.
day I was, most of my waking hours were spent in the company of these boys, either as a teacher, a games master, supervisor of study, going to games. Yes, I had great sympathy, great understanding of these people.
What was your instinct, given that experience, given that routine you were involved in day after day, was your routine not to say, I have to tell this young lad's mother what he has been subjected to. I have to tell his father.
My instinct was to believe that the people in Kilnacrot Abbey would do all of that. My first concern was to eliminate the root of the problem, namely the abusive activity of Brendan Smyth. And that's what I aimed at by getting the evidence precise, assiduously gathered, as you say, placed before the bishop to bring to the abbot, and to impress upon him that this must be attended to. The other things, even today, would be not part of the person receiving the report to tell the parents. Even today, by today's standards, that would be out of line with best practice.
But when you found out that one of the boys, whose details you provided in that report, living in Belfast, that he was abused for a time afterwards, that his sister was abused for several years by Brendan Smyth, that his first cousins were abused up to 1988. Did your stomach turn?
Yes, absolutely. I was devastated by that. Absolutely. That the response had been so defective.
Did you feel,
but I felt
did you feel inadequacy on your own part?
No, I know.
That you hadn't followed through?
No, I keep saying that it wasn't. I don't think it was my role to follow through. I did my part.
It's not about roles. This is as a human being.
As a human being, yes. But I never doubted that it wouldn't be followed through. I was so sure that action would be taken, effective action. And I had no knowledge of Brendan Smyth's history before that or after that. I had no awareness of that until years in the 1990s.
But now we know what happened. And you have this question again as to, because of that track record, not done deliberately, but because of your role in it, when people are asking questions again about, in this time when the church is under pressure, about your suitability, about whether you actually have the desire to stay in the job, because you are a man of God. What would Jesus do in this situation? Suffer little children? Are you asking yourself, in the circumstances, because of what happened, not through my deliberate actions or inactions, but because I was a party to what happened, that maybe it might be better for all concerned that I stepped aside? Has that crossed your mind?
Obviously that has crossed my mind, but at the same time, when I give an account of what I did what I was expected to do to the best of my ability, promptly, effectively, then I don't think that is a resigning matter. But I also am convinced that from the experience of struggling with these problems, I have learned something, and that this must continue, this campaign, this effort to make sure that our safeguarding practices and procedures are the best and monitored and implemented. And for that reason, I am heartened by the judgment of Monsignor Chicluna this morning in an interview with RTE, who said that I should, learning from that hard experience, continue in my role.
So it's not a resigning matter?
Not in my view, no.
There are those, final question, there are those who would say that Seán Brady, the country priest, would prefer to be off working in a parish, reading his breviary, working among his community, but that Seán Brady, the Primate of all Ireland, is taking a hit for the institution, staying in the role, keeping collective responsibility on track, and against his instincts as a country priest, he's remaining in that position.
Well, you say, you ask, what would Jesus do? I don't know. I keep praying about the thing. I keep reflecting upon it. I try and discern what God's will is for me each day and try and carry that out. The same as on that day that I went to be part of that interview in Dundalk, I carried it out, as I say, carefully, meticulously, promptly, and that's the way I go forward.